Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat is quickly coming upon us. It is Friday, right before Shabbat Bemidbar at Temple Sinai here in our sanctuary. Again, I wish I could be seeing you right in front of us and be able to speak to you in person. But that, of course, is not the reality of the moment in which we're living in. We are living through a time in which there is much darkness, in which there is much hardness, in which there is much suffering. But we also are here today to celebrate an amazing day in Jewish history. Today is Yom Yerushalayim. Today is the day in which we celebrate Jerusalem. Today is the day in which we celebrate the unifying of Jerusalem and the redemption of the Jewish Western Wall. We have to know that before 1967, the Jewish people were not able to really pray at the Western Wall in a good way. They weren't able to have access to that area. Jerusalem was split in half. And in 1967, it looked like Israel was in an extremely dark place. The state of Israel was an extremely dark place. And I have the merit of serving a congregation with older members who tell me what it was like during 1967, even in America. People really believed that this was it. That this was the moment of Israel's destruction, that this was a do-or-die moment where nations from all around Israel's border were entrapping it on all sides, that this was the end of the dream and the experiment of Jewish nationhood in the land of our forefathers, that this was it. It was an extremely dark time. And not only that, it was darkness that had only previously come out. That same generation had saw the darkness of the 1948 war, in which there were many casualties, 1/10 of the country's population fighting for independence in the land of Israel to create a state of Israel. And of course, only a couple years before that, the horrible Holocaust with the death of 6 million Jewish souls. This was a nation that saw darkness. This was a population that saw darkness. And here they were again in 1967 with nations along all its boundaries. And we all know the end of the story. We know the miraculous victory of the Jewish people, crushing all of its enemies and redeeming the land, and ending up with Jerusalem, ending up with the old city, ending up with access to the Kotel. Is there anything more miraculous than this? I don't really know. And for that day, that reason, today was instituted as a holiday. There was a Rebbe who lived at this time. He's called the previous Slonimer Rebbe, and he was a Hasidic Rebbe living in the Orthodox area of Jerusalem. And he was living through this moment and trying to interpret it for his Hasidim. There are many religious Jews that believe that we have to sort of live outside of time, that these events, they're just happening in the world and they don't really, they don't affect us religiously and we don't interpret them. But no, the Slonimer Rebbe was very different. He saw God's hand in this momentous miracle that happened to the Jewish people. And he told his followers something very interesting. He told his Hasidim something very, very interesting. First, he said what I just said, that the Jewish people went through momentous darkness, that we were just in momentous darkness, and now we are in tremendous light. We have access to the Kotel. But what was amazing that he did as a leader is he directed the minds of his followers. He directed the minds of his fellow Jews that only a second ago they were in darkness. Because when we are in joy, when we are in happiness, when we are in celebration, we tend to forget about the darkness that was before. We only feel the joy at that moment, and soon we just take it for granted. And I think what he was pointing at, and he was trying to show us, of course, is that if only you would see beforehand that during the darkness there was great light coming. If you only believe that during this darkness, during this Hester Panim, during this hiding of God's face, there was a revelation that was to come, that only out of this darkness could come great light. He also warned his followers an important message that we also need to take on as well. We cannot be blinded by the lights and by the scariness, the frightening qualities of events. We can't just be blinded by our feelings of joy and or joy in some cases, or blinded by trepidation and fear in other cases, depending on the situation. But instead, as Jews, we have the tafkid, we have the function to look inside the event and to find and to ask from our own souls. Mifashpes b'ma'asav, we have to examine deeply within and to find what God wants out of us at this exact moment. The Sloner Rebbe asks his Hasidim to look inside the miracle of the redemption of the Western Wall, the redemption of the Kotel in 1967, and say, what does God want of you at this very moment? I think in that way, we too, in this momentous moment that we are standing in, also need to look deeply inside where we are. In order to find and to understand a little bit more about what we need, we have to look into our Torah portion this week, Parshat Bemidbar, and also the holiday coming up, which is Shavuot. We also have to remember as well the last time this community was all together in the synagogue, which was of course during Purim and the story of Megillah. All of these messages together, all these holidays together, all these texts together will help us to understand where we need to go. It is told in our tradition that we received the Torah on Mount Sinai on the 6th of Sivan. On that day, the Jewish people agreed to do what God wanted, to agree to follow the Torah. But there's a very famous midrash, very, very famous midrash, in which at first God held Mount Sinai over the Jewish people and said, if you don't accept this Torah, I will crush you. I'm going to repeat it again because it could be shocking for those who hear it the first time, right? We have a midrash, we have a rabbinic exegesis that's part of our tradition that says that God held Mount Sinai over the Jewish people and said, I'm going to drop this mountain on you if you don't accept the Torah. What's the deal with that? Now, we obviously would have a lot of problems with that. Right? One, how could God do that? But I think in a sharper question or a more rabbinic question was how, if the Torah is a contract, as we spoke about last week, if the Torah is a covenant, if the Torah is a contract, how can it be considered a valid contract if one party is forced into that contract? How is that possible? How is it possible that the Jewish people can be considered liable to the obligations of the Torah and have to do it if God literally forced them into it, held the mountain over it? It's like holding a gun to someone's face and saying you have to do it. That's what the midrash seems to be saying. Now you might say that this is a crazy midrash. I understand. But if you actually look at Mount Sinai and you look at happen, as we're going to read in the Torah when we get to Shavuot, right, that this was a momentous occasion, right? There was fire, there was lightning, there was thunder, there was sounds. It literally was like that the Jewish people, the Torah at one point says that the Jewish people saw the voices, you usually hear voices, right? They saw the voices, right? And they heard the lights, right? That's the opposite. That's not usually what happens. But that's what was happening. It was backwards. It was unbelievable. It was so crazy that the Jewish people, the everyday Jewish person, was completely terrified. I mean, think about it. If you saw a mountain on fire and literally God's voice shook your bones, you'd be terrified out of your mind. And I think that's, in a deeper sense, what the sages mean by they held Mount Sinai over the Jewish people and said, I'm going to drop it on you, right? They were terrified. And you get to the same conclusion that the Jewish people were in some way compelled to accept the Torah at that point. And in some ways, I think we as Jews wish that those were the miracles. We wish it was that revealed to us, God's effect on our lives, that God appeared to us and spoke to us and said, I'm going to give you a vaccine and this malady is going away. And then God comes down and gives it to us on a silver platter, right? We wish that, but it would be terrifying. It would be completely unhuman. That's what happens on Shavuot. And so what's interesting is the rabbis actually say, if that be the case, then did the Jewish people really accept the Torah? Which is a crazy question, right? Did the Jewish people really accept the Torah? Right? They have to enter it upon their own free will. So the rabbis ask, when did they accept the Torah for real? And of course, the famous answer is Purim. Purim, the story of Esther and Mordechai, the story of redemption to the Jewish people. And of course, the famous line the famous line in that story is that all of the Jews, right, the haters of the Jewish people stood up to try to slaughter them, to try to kill them. And it was exactly nahapochu, that the people who hated the Jewish people were gone and that the Jewish people won out. The exact opposite happened. We call it in Hebrew nahapochu. There was ultimate redemption on that day. But what's very interesting, as we know about the Megillah, about the Esther story, is that which character doesn't seem to appear in the Megillah story? Yes, you're right. The most famous character of all, God. God doesn't appear. God's name is never mentioned. It literally, Esther means Hester, means hiddenness. It's a place where God is hidden. It's a secretive place. Only at that time did the rabbis say the Jews freely received the Torah. When the Jews were living in a foreign land, remember that happened outside of Israel, right? When there wasn't, God didn't come down in a revealed way and do this like manifest miracle so that like everyone believed and everyone saw. It's not in the case that everyone was in fear and in trepidation from God, right? No, they were in trepidation and fear from seemingly natural things that were happening in the world, that people were being evil and bad things were happening, right? That's what they were in trepidation about. The response also is very interesting in the Purim story. They chose to fast. They instituted a fast. They did repentance. They thought of how they needed to be better. And then nahafochu, everything changed. There was a miracle. Now that miracle, of course, wasn't in a revealed way in that we can point to say, that's God right over there. Right? Hear his voice. Right? No, that's him. Right? But it was where one had to look closely in. And the Jewish people looked closely in at that time, and it literally the Sefer Megillah says, Megillat Esther says, many people meet Yahadim at the time, many people became Jewish at the time, and the Torah was then accepted, the rabbis interpreted it as the Torah was then accepted anew. What does it say about our tradition that the Torah is explicitly only could be accepted at a time when God is in Hester and there is great darkness? There is nothing as sad as the beginning of the Megillah story. You know what? There's sometimes something very sad about the end of the Megillah story. So much violence, right? It's a dark story. It's a dark timeline. It's a place where Jews don't necessarily have power, where people live in darkness, and there's a foolish king. And it seems that everything is just going on without anybody controlling it. It's a time of deep hester. It's a time of deep secretness. But at that time, the Jews chose to receive the Torah and fulfill their holy role and come back to God, because they saw the possibility of the light within the darkness. They saw that this redemption was part of God's message, that God was speaking to us even during our suffering to return and become better people and to become more of who we should be. The message is that as Jews, we find Torah within suffering. And this is related through our mystical tradition, of course, as well. There's a concept in which what the angels in Ezekiel are called Ratzeh Vashuv. Ratzeh Vashuv. The angels would run up in Ezekiel's vision, in the first chapter of Ezekiel, the angels would Ratzeh, they would run towards God, they would desire God, they would go and run towards God, Vashuv, and then they would return back down. Many Hasidic masters, and also, of course, the Zohar and the mystical tradition, interpret this as the individual Jewish person's spiritual journey. That each of us have moments where we run towards God, and each of us have moments where we return back to the world in which we are. And we have to understand that both moments are important and integral to a Jewish person's soul and productive in the end. We tend to think that only the moments where we feel like we're running towards God, where we feel close to God, are the moments in which we connect. But that's actually not the case. What the mystical tradition says is we run towards God when we need God. We run towards God when we feel we're lacking, right? We run towards God when we are ready to need more and to build ourselves, right? And we know what we need to do, and we know where we need to go. But then there are mysterious periods. There are dark periods. There are periods where we don't feel connected to God. Those periods are called shuv periods. Those periods are called return periods. Those periods are where God returns to us, where we return back down, but who follows us? The Shekhinah, God's presence. The mystical tradition, specifically, I'm referring to a specific Rabbi Charlap, who says specifically that times of shuv, times when we return back to this world, times when we live in, therefore we live in darkness, going back into the physicality of the world again, dealing with the hard questions of life and feeling like we're very far away from the perfection of the soul, are times when Torah is revealed. Because where was Torah revealed from? Torah was revealed from up there. Torah comes from up there. Torah comes from God. That comes from upon high. Right? Torah comes when we need it, when we're feeling dark, when we feel like we can't open up our mouths in prayer anymore, when we have no idea where to go. That's when Torah is revealed. Torah is revealed in the wilderness of Mount Sinai. That's where Torah is revealed. Torah is revealed in the suffering, when we are in darkness, when we are in Purim, when we feel like we're being slaughtered, when the world is chaos. That's when the Torah comes in and instructs us how to be and where we need to go. That light comes right after the darkness. It is a response to chaos. It's an ordering of the world. It's how God helps us to order our lives and the world around us. That's what the Torah is about. And it only comes at the times of darkness. It comes at the times where we can't see forward. Because if we could see forward, if we could see where we need to go, then what's the point of the Torah? The Torah only comes at a time when we can't see forward. That's shuv. That's when it's coming to us. That's when we're returning to the world. And it's specifically a time when we have to be within the physical world, helping and doing and being present. When we have to be in this body, we're told that actually as human beings, we're souls, we're spiritual beings that are infinite, right? Our souls are infinite inside us. They're pieces of God, that they're actually infinite. But there's a midrash and there's much Zohar about this that says that it's so difficult for the soul to have to go into this tiny little body, this tiny little car we shove it into that has health problems, that falls, that fails, right? It has to go and work in this body. It's the thing that manifests this body, right? We see after people pass away, there's no soul left. There's nothing to the body. It's just an empty form at that point. Only with the soul within the body can the body be manifest. And indeed, we are all souls driving around in our vehicles, in our cars, until they finally break down and our souls are free. But the soul needs to be within the body in order to be manifest within the world. The soul can only act within the world. The soul can only be and exist and do mitzvot and do good actions and actually live in this world and be manifest and be revealed. In that way, revealing God's presence when it's within the body. And that's a painful experience. I think we all feel that. We all feel that in our lives when we go back to the work week from Shabbos. We deal with the trivialities and the difficulties of life. We suffer. We work hard to build up our lives. That is being in the body. That's being in the physical world. And in that way, when we do that, when we build up the world, that is the only time when our inner soul can be revealed in the external, when it can actually be manifest through that hard work. In that way, it's now the beginning of Shabbat Bemidbar, when the Jews were in the wilderness. Many crazy things were going to happen in this book. We're starting a new book of the Torah, the book of Numbers. Crazy things. Miriam is going to get Sarat. She's going to suffer. They're going to build the golden snake at some point. Many people are going to die. There's the Baraglim of seeing out and bringing back the negative report about the land. There's Bilam. There's talking donkeys. There's all kinds of crazy, crazy things. There's even Moses getting punished at the waters of Meribah. Right? There's a lot of craziness and there's a lot of suffering that's going to happen to the Jewish people because they're in the wilderness, because they're in chaos, because they are in darkness at this point. And at this point, we are told that the Jewish people have to be counted, that they have to be counted in that place. And we all know that counting is actually forbidden within Judaism. It's actually forbidden to count Jews. Why would it be forbidden to count Jews? Because Jews are much bigger than a number, right? Jews aren't just some number. Right? Human beings are not just some number. We are divine souls within. How can you count us? Yet on the other hand, we have to be counted. Why would the Torah do that? Because it's trying to show us that in order to reveal that divinity, in order to nuso et kol rosh b'nei Israel, in order to lift up the heads of every Jewish person, right? They actually have to be counted in a physical body. They actually have to be present. They actually have to do the hard work of actually existing within the world in order to manifest their potential, in order to actually manifest the spiritual, in order to manifest the soul. And again, it goes all the way back to the Torah and back to what we talked about with Yom Yerushalayim, and it goes back to what we talked about with Shavuot and the giving of the Torah, and it goes back to what we talked about receiving the Torah on Purim. When do we receive the Torah? We receive the Torah in darkness. We receive the Torah in suffering. We receive the Torah when we work hard, even though it's dark, even though it's hard, even though we don't feel, even though we don't connect. That is the time in which the light comes. That's when the light came in 1967 when Israel was going. When everyone thought, when there was major campaigns in Israel, in America, to save Israel from its almost utter destruction. And there was the kotel. The light is coming, my friends. There will be salvation. The Torah is coming. We're going to receive the Torah. There is darkness right now, but all the more so, we need instruction. We need light at this time. This is why in Shabbat Bemidbar we are told that over and over again, the avodah, the work that we have to do is that we have to go from one place to another. We have to travel from one place to another. We have to unpack the Mishkan, and then we have to pack up the Mishkan, and then we have to schlep the Mishkan, and then we have to fight wars, and then we have to carry the Mishkan like Leviim and Kohanim. Do you think their jobs were easy? No, they had to carry, they had to schlep this heavy ark all around. Why? Because that's the avodah of this world. That's the only time when the soul can be revealed. That's the time when we receive the Torah, when we roll up our sleeves and do the action of mitzvot and maasim tovim. When we do mitzvot and maasim tovim in this world, when we do mitzvot and we do good actions in this world, when we help each other, and when we reach out and listen to God, even in that darkness, even in that time, when we strive to do good and reach out our ears to listen to God and what God is trying to communicate us, even within that darkness. So you might say, Rabbi, what is the message at this point? For me, and I think it's going to be different for each of us, but I think one thing we need to do right now, one of the messages of this crisis is that we all have to feel the darkness and pain of not being able to be in relationship with each other. As wonderful as it might be to hear me speaking right now, it's probably nothing compared to actually being together. It's being nothing compared to actually having dinner together and being in relationship and seeing each other's faces and talking to each other and being with each other. How much did we devalue that last time? How much do we not pay attention to how we speak to each other and how we talk to each other and how to value the moments and relationships in which we're together? This is a moment where we can listen to God when God is telling us, value each other. Value how you talk to each other. Value how you relate to each other. Value how you deal with each other. I hope we all can't wait to be together again and to be in relationship and be in community. We are all receiving a new Torah at this time. On the 6th of Sivan, we'll receive the Torah again. And this Torah should tell us, this Torah of coronavirus, of this time of darkness, that we need to value human relationship and the divine soul within each human being more than ever. That we have to watch and learn the ways we need to talk to each other and act with each other and be with each other. And we have to remember, of course, that even within the darkness of where we stand, we can still hear God's voice, and that we can't be terrified by the lights and the flames and the terror and the sadness. But we have to incline our ears to reach out for God's message even within this darkness and even within the suffering, to do the hard work of living in this reality where we have failing bodies and sometimes failing spirits. Only at this time of darkness do the Jewish people truly take on and receive the Torah. I hope you all have a wonderful Shabbat Shalom.